Have you ever scrolled for miles and ended up feeling more alone than when you started? When so much of our culture is online, it's easy to think of it as required to maintain connection. But these digital relationships have never been so weak, so hollow. And those feelings that follow you after you put down your phone, they're not an accident. They were designed. It all started in 2006 when a single decision poisoned the internet forever. I was there, and I'm going to tell you exactly what happened. Today, I want to walk you through an evolution of connection from the perspective of me, a Xennial, a generation that straddles Gen X and Millennial, the world's last analog children and its first digital adults. Let's dive right in. I was born in 1983, and I grew up in what I call the analog era. If I wanted to connect with friends, I had to bike across town. Streaming for us was me going over to my friend John's house and then going down to the stream to catch minnows or look for treasures in the stream. We had video games and films, but I had to go over to people's houses to play them, or they had to come to mine. The video stores were only open for certain hours of the day. There's no 24/7 stores back then. And there were even certain days of the week that nothing was open. That's the era I was a child in, and I have a lot of formative memories from that era. But it was quickly followed by what I call the frontier era, specifically the digital frontier. This was before browsers. There was no Google Chrome, there was no Safari, there was no Edge. And if we wanted to get online, we needed a different program to do it. We had access through my dad's work. I can't remember what we used to get access, but if we wanted to go to certain areas, we had to know the URL or even the IP address to put in to get there. Search engines started to come online in this era, but they were really rudimentary. Even Yahoo, which came a little bit later, was handmade. It was personally curated instead of Google, where it was all algorithmic. But one of the most formative things in this digital frontier was the first chat room I ever found. And it was for the video game Lords of the Realm, which came out in 1994. It's a strategy game that I played, and I found a chat room where you could organize games, but no one was really in it, or very few people. And so I would spend the whole day running from the bedroom down to the basketball hoop, shooting hoops for 5-10 minutes, running back upstairs, checking to see if anyone had logged into the chat room. It was kind of a wild time for me. Just that first, like, oh my gosh, there's other people I can connect to online. And I remember finally organizing a game with this person in the chat room where we exchanged phone numbers and we started to play Lords of the Realm against each other online, which was a crazy concept for me. Fast forward a month, and my mom's asking me why there's this big charge on her phone bill, which I denied. She called the number, that person denied. We must have both kids must have denied that we did this. And I never really admitted it. Mom, if you're watching, sorry I did that. Sorry I lied to you. But it was a formative time for me, and it was a lot of fun. But you got the charge waived, so it doesn't matter. GeoCities came around in this digital frontier. Anyone could make a website and put whatever they wanted on it. And I created a lot of cringy content. This was early creator years for me. And you could install, this is the era of like construction animated GIFs and counters on your page to count how many people visited, early analytics. You could install a guestbook software where people could leave you a message, a very, very rudimentary form of connection. And then you could join a web ring. So I had a big South Park website, and you could join a web ring, and then you put this code on your website, and then people could basically go through all the other South Park websites that were on the web ring. Just a network effect. Very, very early network effect. This frontier era was followed by what I call the conversation era. So back in this time, smartphones definitely exist, but cell phones did. And some of my friends in high school had cell phones. A lot of them had pagers. Some of them had this cell phone called a Nextel, which had two-way connections. It was basically like a walkie-talkie. And I remember my friends nexteling each other at like bonfires and stuff, and it was crazy. They would be at a different house party and we were at another one. and they were connecting in that way. And so it was texts and things like that existed, but not everybody had these devices. I remember laminating with tape a card that had everyone's home phone number, cell phone number, pager number. I had to create a specific notation so I could tell which was which. So I had to page people, and then they'd call me back, or call their home and ask for them because their mom or dad would pick up. And this seems so archaic to what we have today, where I can have instant access to everybody on my cell phone, on my smartphone. I did get a cell phone in high school. I had to pay for it myself, but it was just for calls and texts, and we had to use T9, so you had to, a special way of texting back then. And so not everyone had cell phones, so it wasn't our primary mode of communication. In fact, in my hometown, AOL Instant Messenger dominated. I was on IRC, Internet Relay Chat, and I had an ICQ account, but in our town, AOL Instant Messenger, or AIM, was the big player. That's what everyone chatted with on in the evenings. But it was a one-to-one conversation. It was text messages, essentially. But we were online, and we were exploring the internet and texting each other and having these conversations. And it wasn't group chats, it was one-to-one. So it was a deeper bond than a group chat might create, although group chats are great. In the background of the internet there was some burgeoning technologies like Napster and other file sharing. But these things facilitated connection in a way that technology today doesn't do the same way. But it took all day to download a MP3 on Napster because we had a modem and we didn't have fast internet. So it would take hours to do this. And sometimes you'd download an MP3 and it wouldn't be the one that you wanted because they named it wrong. Well, that wasted 8 hours of your, time online. And this conversation era was followed by me going to college, which I call the Broadband Era. So all of a sudden I have access to a T1 connection. Essentially it was just fast internet. And the whole kind of online world really opened up to me at this time. And it was growing too. I think it was pretty new, a T1 connection at my college up in Duluth. So I graduated in 2001, and that's when I started college. And this was, 9/11. A couple weeks after I went to school, 9/11 happened. And kind of like I used to bike around town, I didn't chat with people online. I went around to their dorm rooms or their apartments to talk to them about what they felt about it. And so that's kind of my initial college experience. They had Palm computers. I was in a computer science program, so they gave us something called a Palm computer, which wasn't quite a smartphone. It was a computer, but they quickly abandoned it. It didn't really go gangbusters like they thought it would. I ended up just playing video games on it. I installed emulators and played Nintendo games on it. That's all I really used it for. It was a era of dorm life, playing video games, multiplayer games in person. That was the connection that we kind of still forged these bonds, because that's what we were still all used to. We weren't all used to being online, even though we had access to that. It quickly grew into that. We started to realize, hey, we have access to this fast internet connection, so we can play video games online, and I really dove into that. I started playing Dave Defeat and Counter-Strike against friends that I'd made online, and that was a blast, and I kind of never looked back. There wasn't really social networks back then. There was a service, I remember specifically my sophomore year of college, called Hot or Not, and this was you uploaded a picture of yourself and you were rated from 1 to 10 whether you were hot or not, and then you just did that with other people. That's all you did. It sounds cruel, but honestly, is it much different than what we do today with likes and reactions and things like that? It was a little more raw, but it was a little more innocent in a way too. After kind of some early forays into online gaming, this is when massively multiplayer online games, or MMOs, started to come out. And I played Final Fantasy XI with friends. And again, these were friends I met in real life that I played these games with. So the connection was forged in reality and then strengthened digitally. And then I went to World of Warcraft. I lived in a house of 7 people, and I think 5 of us played World of Warcraft, and we played that a ton, like a ton. I did that way more than I went to class, way more than I should have, honestly. I played that game so much that there's still certain music albums that I listen to that I think back to certain zones in Azeroth, the world of that game, that it just brings me back instantly. It happens every single time. And then, towards the tail end of this broadband era, something called Facebook came out. Back then it was called The Facebook, thefacebook.com. It was very early social network. You could have your profile, you could put your interests on there, and then you could comment on people's walls. That was kind of how you interacted with people. But that's it. And colleges had access to that, but nobody else did. So there was an exclusivity to it, but it was a real social network. It was a true social network. And then fast forward a couple years, we enter the algorithmic era. And this is that moment in time that poisoned the internet forever, I think. And it's called the feed. In 2006, Facebook introduced the feed. If you were online at this time and you had a Facebook account at this time, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. And maybe only Xennials of my era do. None of us asked for the feed. It was given to us. It was foisted upon us that this was the new way you're going to use Facebook. And you know it because you go on Facebook today or Instagram today or TikTok. Take your pick. The feed, the infinite scroll of here I'm going to use an algorithm to show you what you might want. And we just never went back. It was a slow poison at that time. It wasn't that bad, but it's just grown over time. 1 year later, the iPhone came out, the first real burst onto the scene smartphone. I didn't get my first smartphone several years later, and it had a full keyboard. Imagine that. But then other technology platforms. So lots of people had smartphones. People had fast internet. Then they got to get apps on their phone. So this was social news became huge. The Slashdot, Fark, Dig, Reddit, that's where these things kind of grew up. And apps, Instagram, Twitter, Snapchat, Vine, the really early short form video, and then TikTok, etc. So that's the algorithmic era, starting in 2006 with the feed. And what follows that is the mandate era. It started with the pandemic. The pandemic drove everything and everyone online out of necessity. Sure, there were other types of mandates in that era, but technology became mandated too. There are still restaurants I go to that I have to scan a QR code to look at their menu, or I have to order the food on my phone instead of talking to someone. And I feel like an old person yelling at a cloud, but what are we doing? It doesn't make any sense. We don't have to do that anymore, but we still are. So it drove technology online and these kind of interactions online, but it also drove every generation online. Because overnight, all of a sudden, you needed the internet to have connection with the people you knew in the real world. Or you started to connect with new people. And so what really happened there? These older generations, and truly the newer generations, no one's teaching you. No one's educating you. I grew up on the internet. I get it. And even I fall to these pitfalls that the technology brings. But these older generations don't have the skills to navigate it. No offense. It's not something we teach people how to handle this. And it's like not being able to swim, being thrown into the deep end and saying, good luck. That's what happened overnight in the pandemic. And we're still dealing with that hangover today. And what's happening today? Just continuing the mandate era. Large language models are out there. Generative AI, so ChatGPT, for people that don't know those words. If you have a job, you're being basically forced to use these tools. And these tools have great utility. They can be super valuable. They can do some things very, very well. but they're becoming mandated in the pursuit of productivity. And they are a catalyst for poisoning what was already poisonous. So it can be used to create content, fake or not, to fuel that online engagement. But also, people are using this to replace real connection. They're interacting with this for therapy. I've done it. But these tools are, sycophantic. They hype you up. They make you feel great because that's what engages you. So these platforms are picking up on what social media already figured out. How to keep people engaged in the platform, how to keep them there. And there are kids dying that could have gotten help in the real world, but are using these tools to try to help them. And they go off the rails and they do the exact opposite. I'll share a link in the description of a story about a child that died, that killed himself, because ChatGPT kind of encouraged it in a way. I'll let you read the article and make your own conclusions. But these are a false connection. It's a mirror. The way that these things work, I'm not going to get into detail, but it's not really thinking. It's not creating anything new. It's just mirroring our own humanity back upon us. And so what does the future look like? Whether it's a mandate era or not, I've heard people say, in the future, everyone's going to have an AI companion on their phone. And I say, well, of course they will. I'm sure I will too. But again, we're not being taught how to handle this technology. And if we start to interact with a piece of technology on our phone that is like a human being but isn't, then all of a sudden everybody else in the world is othered. And in an era where we're already othering huge swaths of people in our country or the world, that's really dangerous. It's going to silo people even further into their own one person, individual connection. And all of a sudden that connection will be lost to everybody else. And that promise of the internet, the promise of being able to be connected to everybody in the whole world, being able to go on a chat room and play Lords of the Realm with someone in a different state or a different country, that's all going to be lost. It's going to be gone, and it's already going away. So what can we do? I mean, there's a great opportunity we can have with this technology. There's never been more that we can do with the technology that's in our pocket. I'm recording this video on my phone, on my smartphone, and I'm going to post it on my smartphone. And that gives me a lot of power in the world, like no one's ever had before. But I think when it comes to relationships, when it comes to connection, we need to take an honest assessment of the people in our life, the people we have commitments to, and really look, is the technology serving it? Is it strengthening those connections? Is our activity at night, in the evening, during the day, really serving the connections that we need to move forward as human beings in this world? I know it hasn't mine, but I'd ask you to take a look. Go through the contacts in your phone, pull out the 10 most important people in your life, and really ask yourself, are you connecting with them in a meaningful way that goes beyond digital? Ideally, you go analog. You don't have to. But there's ways of connecting on our phone that aren't through social media. It's no accident that we don't call them social networks anymore, and we call them social media. It's because that's what they are. They're media platforms. They're built for us to engage with them, to consume content, so they can show us ads. They're not built for us to connect, not anymore. So look at the people in your life and find ways of connecting with them that are more meaningful than the way you are today, because we're going to need that in the future. That's all I have for today. I'd ask for you to subscribe. If you know of anyone dealing with phone usage or any other habit change, I'm here posting once a week, and I'm committed to helping them. Until next time, appreciate you. Bye.